My guest this week is Mark Webber. When Mark discovered Pulp as a teenage music fan in 1985, the band was on first-name terms with most of their limited audience. Over the next few years, Mark began to help out with stage sets and light shows, eventually becoming the group's first tour manager and running the fan club. Having been called upon to play guitar and keyboards at live shows, he was asked to join the band in 1995 and appears on their albums Different Class, This Is Hardcore, and We Love Life. When Pulp went on hiatus in 2002, Mark started devoting his time to curating avant-garde cinema and has since published several books on the subject. Mark's new book, I'm With Pulp, Are You?, draws on an extensive collection of ephemera and objects that Mark has accumulated over 4 decades of involvement with the band. It contains photographs, flyers, record covers, set lists, badges, posters, press clippings, and merchandise, alongside masses of promotional material to present a unique history of one of Britain's most beloved bands. I'm With Pulp, Are You? Also features a foreword by Jarvis Cocker and newly commissioned essays by music writers Simon Reynolds and Luke Turner. And Mark has been part of both Pulp reunions and remains in the band as it embarks on more concerts in 2025. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Mark Webber. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm so glad we're getting the chance to talk. You said that this is the single most important and influential music documentary of your life, the Velvet Underground SOUTHBANK show that came out in '86. I'd never seen it before. I think most of our listeners have not seen it, but it is available on YouTube, and I'll put a link to it. But, of course, we got to get into your book and everything that I want to know about you with your obsessions in music and film and how they collided. You had a fanzine, Cosmic Pig?
That's right.
How old were you when you did that?
It ran from, I guess, January to May '86. So that makes me 15.
Did that feel like an eternity then? Like, I've made my statement.
You start something like that with the best of intentions.
Yes.
I mean, it was A6 size, so very small and not many pages. But then you realize, like, doing that once a month, not that easy.
Yeah.
And so it lasted 5 months. And I don't really remember why it stopped. I'm not sure. It was a local music fanzine.
Okay.
It's basically. And, I'm from a town called Chesterfield, which is close to Sheffield. So it was about the bands in that area.
And then the best fanzine name of all time, Step Inside My Pepper Pot. When did that come into being? And how was that different than, like, why did you revisit something that you're like, I'm done with Cosmic Pig?
That was there were 2 issues of Step Inside My Pepper Pot, and that was the following year, 1987, which was my psychedelic year.
Okay.
I guess, I mean, maybe we'll get into what happened in the interim, but I suppose the major event, apart from the SOUTHBANK show documentary, would have been discovering Spaceman 3 in the meantime.
Oh, absolutely.
And my eyes to a whole lot of other music. And so from that point on, I was all about, I guess before Spaceman 3, I was Syd Barrett and Robin Hitchcock and people like that.
Right.
And then Spaceman introduced me to people like Suicide, 13th Floor Elevators, Tab Falco's Panther Burns, all that stuff.
So when you were standing inside Planet X Records in your hometown, it's such a rite of passage to have the trust of a record store owner know your taste and be like, hey, check this out. And it happens to be a Pulp EP. And it seems like they were right. Like, what did that sound like to you? What did they think that you would like about it?
Well, I guess it must have already been known that I was into the Velvet Underground. And I guess because Pulp at that time had someone that played the violin and they were a bit arty and a little bit abrasive, or quite a bit abrasive actually at the time. So they often got compared to the Velvet.
Right.
And so the Little Girl with Blue Eyes EP had just come out, and I was in the shop, and one of the guys that ran the shop, who goes by the name of Henry Normal, played it for me and said, like, I think you might like this. And I liked it a lot. And then maybe 2 months later, they were playing in Chesterfield, which is only 12 miles away from Sheffield, where they're from. And they were playing a concert at the Arts Centre. And so, of course, I went along to that. By now, I I was just starting Cosmic Pig, actually. It was the same month as the first issue. So I went along in the afternoon to interview them. When you write fans, you go to sound checks and press gang bands into interviewing you.
Did they have any following even locally at that point?
It was meager.
Okay.
At that concert there was maybe 50 people.
Right.
When they played in Sheffield, there'd probably be 100 people. Uh, but yeah, it was very, very slim. I usually say they were on first name terms with most of the audience. I mean, there were concerts after that. I've been at a pop concert that were those like 6 or 8 people. It got worse after that point. Got worse before it got better.
Well, was starting the fan club a reaction to that? Was your goal to, I need to spread the gospel of this band?
Well, that was a few years later. The fan club started maybe in 91, 92.
Okay.
Uh, um, and so that was like after it looked like the fortunes were changing. I guess My Legendary Girlfriend, when that came out as a single, it got quite a bit more attention and people started coming to the shows. And already by that time, I'd been, well, I guess traveling with them to concerts and helping them like dress the stage. They used to do wrap things in tin foil and have toilet roll draped across the stage. Not because it was toilet roll, just because it was something cheap that looked interesting in the lights.
Right.
So I did that for a while, and also projecting our family's Super 8 films over the band in like my idea of what the Exploding Plastic Inevitable might have looked at.
One of the things that's amazing in the book, though, is that there's a ticket from a 1980 Pulp show.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like thinking about what I was listening to in 1980. Devo's Freedom of Choice, the Cars, the Residents, very synth driven stuff. And Pulp are like in this island, right? It's so hard to fathom that that band was starting to put together the elements of what they would become in 1980. It just seems unfathomable to me.
Yeah, I mean that's even before my time, like 5 years before 5 years before I discovered them. But Jarvis started the group when he was at school in 1978, and that ticket for a concert in the lunch hour at school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess what they were doing then didn't bear much relation with what came afterwards. But there's the John Peel session is like not long after that, and that is quite representative of the first iteration of Pulp.
So, were they really easy for you to connect with as a fan to a band when you were, just going to these shows? Were they thankful to have someone, or, you know?
Well, I guess. Well, I mean, for me, they were very intriguing. I mean,
Sure.
they were generally, like 4 or 5 years older than me, which when you're 15, 16 is quite a lot. And so they seemed very like mature and sophisticated in a way, but they're also like very strange people and very different kinds of people as well, different individuals. And so I was like very curious that something this unusual and seemingly brilliant was happening like so close to the town where I was going to school. And on their part, I don't know, I guess they were just, a little bit amused that there was me and 2 friends from Chesterfield that, were sort of devoted to them. And I guess they were just a bit amused that these kids, these like psychedelic tangerine flake kids from Chesterfield were like wanting to follow them around and help them with their daft stage show.
It's so great. I mean, it's so weird. Before I joined Got Out by Voices, I just was around and I would be like, how can I help? Can I take photographs? Can I silk screen album covers? But I did fantasize about being asked to be in that band. Did you
Uh-huh.
have similar dreams where you were like, oh, I could really add something to this?
No, really not at all. I guess I was
Okay.
Uh, well, let's think. Well, because I guess the time when they actually started to eventually like gather a following, they'd been through this weird kind of East European Eurodisco phase, which no one was interested in. That's when there was like 8 people going to a concert. And then they'd done this album, this weird sort of semi-electronic album, Separations, which just seemed so off the wall. And then they were just starting to kind of go towards something that might be conceived as pop music.
Right.
And whereas I was at the time, I had Pulp on one side, but then on the other side, I was just totally obsessed with Spaceman 3 and the Velvets and that whole world. So I was just, I guess, thankful to be, around a band and kind of on the fringes of music. Because by that time, I guess I'd left school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I tried to get on an art foundation course at the college where I first saw the Pulp concert, and I must be the like first person ever that was like refused after doing the interview,
Oh,
because that
no.
was where everybody went when they didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives. And so then I was just like bumming around on the dole, on an employment benefit, pretending that I was writing fanzines and going to concerts and spending all my money on records.
Well, I was touched in the book that you said that your dad, at a certain point, kept up with, you know, articles about pulp and
Mhm.
fanzine stuff and things like that. It was kind of touching. So when did you start winding down the fan club portion of you, and how did you get asked to be in the band?
Well, it was like there was like a graph with 2 lines intersecting, and there was. I mean, I was running the fan club and I was the tour manager, and uh, then Jarvis decided he didn't want to play guitar and sing so much, so he could just concentrate on like singing and dancing around, and so he I mean, I was like a vaguely competent guitarist and I was always around. So he asked me if I would play some guitar parts. They had other songs with like more keyboard parts than Candice could play herself. And so they asked me to play those. And so then there was a while when I was tour manager, fan club, and extra musician at concerts. And then I'm hanging around the rehearsal room. So then they're writing songs and I'm contributing to that because they just come out of jamming. And so it just all got a bit too much. And there was like looking back over my diaries, like when I was doing the book, there was some like tense periods, it seems, where I was really frustrated with what my lot was, in the band. And then we got to the point like where we'd like written and recorded Common People that had come out. The band were hugely popular. We were still recording Different Class, the album that song's on. And there was this meeting, which I wasn't invited to, with the band and the managers. And then after a few hours, they like called me upstairs, and I thought they were going to say, thanks a lot for all your help. You can see where this is going now. We're hugely successful,
Yes.
and yeah, see ya. But but they shocked me by saying, we'd like you to join the group and, part of the equal partnership of the band and the business and everything. And, we're going from there.
Yeah, in the book you say Pulp was not a bunch of friends who shared a passion for the same kind of music. It was far from that, but somehow these five freaks came together and I slipped in and became one of them. That is such a beautiful way. It is Pulp is a chemistry band. Like you need the five different versions of yourselves to make the thing. And I'm just curious, I'm not trying to like demystify anything, but is there a natural progression in terms of how you all collaborate? Pulp is just so singular.
It's like the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. It's like one of those situations. I mean, the songs used to always come out of us all just being in the practice room, usually everyone in the practice room, just messing around. And Jarvis would
Right.
record everything like on a boombox on a cassette. And, someone would be noodling away, and eventually everyone else joins in, or you join in with someone else, and there's something going on. And then you move on to the next thing, and then Jarvis would go away, listen to all the recordings, and think, well, that could maybe go with that, and that could go with that, and here's another part to go with that. And I don't know, that's the songs would come up.
Did you play the guitar solo on The Fear?
Well, half of it, that's like a dueling guitar solo.
Okay. Do you remember the first moment where you're like, oh, yeah, I've really added to this?
Well, the fear wouldn't be the first thing that I would say that I did like chronologically, but it is one of the things that I'm really proud of. It's like one of the things. I mean, what it's like when you're in a band, you don't go home and listen to your own records.
Yes.
But that is what, if I do listen to one of our records, that would be one that I would put on. Because it just has such an amazing sound, and obviously
It's
if you
so
do
good.
play guitar, it's great fun to like get a loud solo into a song.
Yes.
And also that stupid noise at the end. That was me like unplugging some pedals in at the end of the take.
Oh my God, it's so great.
But yeah, but I guess the first thing that I felt like, oh, I've like actually contributed something here was the song Something Changed on Different Class, which was a really old song. It was a song that Jarvis had sort of tried to do at least in like 1983 or 4. So like a decade before, I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a bit faster then, and they never really sorted out the melody and stuff. But then when we did the demo, I remember being back at my parents' house because the demos were done in Sheffield, like writing a guitar solo for the first time. And so like to actually do that, and it was like work. It wasn't like I just played it. I like somehow don't even know how, constructed it. And then I played it and everybody liked it. And then suddenly it's on a record. That's pretty amazing.
The book is really touching too because you do discuss the highs and lows of being in a band that you adored from afar and then being in it. And I feel like a lot of musicians could probably relate to the part where you talk about you just didn't want to listen to records much anymore. You're kind of, it was just so heartbreaking. But I've talked to people who have had a period where they're like, yeah, I just can't listen to anything right now.
Mhm.
For someone like yourself, obviously, who was obsessed with music, was this where your film interest started creeping in more?
Well, it's the point when I got like really deeply involved in film, I guess. When we talk about the South Bank show, that's really like the beginning of my interest in avant-garde cinema, I guess. But it took a long time before I had the access to the films.
Yeah.
And so, well, I joined the band when we were recording Different Class, and then This Is Hardcore was the next record, and Russell had left, so my influence in the band kind of grew at that point.
Right.
And also we went a bit more conventional, a bit more towards rock at the time, which I guess was partly my doing. Um, and but then, very quickly, as I write about in the book, I started to get frustrated
Yes.
and a little bit disillusioned about, decisions that are made by either by the um, the
Right.
majority or by the singer. And then very quickly I get started, frustrated that I have to not go to a film screening because I've got to go on a TV show or something like that. And then, but the band continued, and
Yeah.
I got more and more frustrated in a way. And, maybe if I'd have been a stronger minded person, I might have left. But I guess I always wanted to hang on, hoping that it would get better because how lucky am I that I'm in such a great band?
Yeah.
And then we did the We Love Life album, which has loads of great songs on it and which I like. But I had sort of checked out, And then eventually, that album came out. It wasn't like a massive success commercially, but we were proud of it. We toured it. And then everyone kind of realized that, maybe it's time to give this a rest.
Right.
Because we didn't want to just carry it on, because it was a business or whatever. Or, maybe the next album would be a success again. We just all wanted to go and do other stuff. And so when that ground to a halt at the end of 2002, that was the point when I kind of was like totally disillusioned with the music business, didn't want any musical instruments in my house.
Right.
And sort of stopped listening to music and started listening to talk radio for a long time. And then there was a period of about 20 years when I was a film curator, essentially. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's get into talking about the South Bank show. First of all, can you tell our listeners what the South Bank show was? Was this a weekly arts program?
It was, well, yeah, it was a series with there were many series, and then it was weekly on a Sunday evening. It's like a very long-running arts documentary program. It ran for about 30 years, I think, from 1978, and it was about all the arts. And in its like golden period, the whole hour was like one documentary. In the last decade or so, it would be divided into two, and it kind of dumbed down, and it was mostly in like the Melvin Bragg, the presenter, interviewing celebrities. It just wasn't so interesting anymore. But when in the 80s, it was like really amazing. And it was kind of unbelievable that they would make one about something then so obscure in culture as the Velvet Underground.
Well, I was looking at some of the other artists they included. They like John Zorn.
Well, this was the extremely unusual one, the John Zorn Sonic Youth, uploading the music. That's great, yeah.
Episodes on J.G. Ballard and David Mamet, and I guess directors like Ken Loach had done episodes, Ken Russell, Tony Palmer. So it seemed like it was a really respected show. And was this kind of rare on TV at time? Like, was this something like every Sunday you were like, oh, I'm kind of excited to see, or was it just hit and miss in terms of your taste?
I guess looking back, it was rare, but at the time, you just kind of accepted it that was there on a Sunday evening, and it was on ITV. It wasn't on the BBC, so that's commercial television.
Okay.
And so it was a slot. So each film is maybe 50 minutes because of the commercial breaks. But at the time, the BBC had this their long-running art series called Arena, which had some really amazing documentaries. Like for me, there's one on the Chelsea Hotel. You could maybe see that on YouTube.
Oh, incredible!
Totally amazing.
Wow.
And there's one on Kenneth Anger, and Hollywood Babylon. Yeah, Arena was really, really amazing. And there's still something in that name now, but it's like a pathetic shadow of what it used to be.
Well, we never had documentaries on TV about the Chelsea Hotel or Kenneth Anger, let alone the Velvet Underground. I just had some questions about it because in your book you talk about hearing the Velvet Underground at age 12 and not being able to crack it, which is the way it should be. I had that record in my parents' record collection. It was the only way my parents could own an Andy Warhol piece of art, was like, we got this record. They never played it. And over the years, I was drawn to this banana peeled cover and put it on and kind of liked parts of it, but was kind of spooked by it, like the glass breaking and is that European Sun? Is that what it is? But I don't think it's a young person should crack it. So, but at some point, obviously, it became so important to you. So do you remember like when that happened and what maybe made it happen?
Right now, I'm not sure because I did an event for the book, a public event the other day, and as I was talking, I realized that maybe my chronology of the story that I've been telling might be messed up. But well, the reason I heard them so young was, I don't know if I was 12 or 13, but it was through discovering David Bowie, who was the first like serious music that I got interested in as a teenager. You know, after you
Okay.
stop listening to the charts and you find something that is yours, David Bowie was the person I discovered. And so through him talking about his influences, I found the Velvet Underground, bought their first album, and didn't understand it. Every song was different. The songs were like nothing I'd ever heard before, and I, to my shame, you know, took it back to like a used record store and traded it in for something else that I don't even know what it was.
Right.
Maybe something really bad. And then the story I've always told is that it was the South Bank show that reintroduced me to the Velvet Underground, because that South Bank show documentary, I guess, was commissioned because there was this vinyl box set coming out that Pulp People released a couple of months after this was broadcast, which the first three albums plus the two albums of outtakes, Another View and VU. Um, and so I bought that off the back of the South Bank show. But I think now I'm thinking maybe I must have bought the first album again in the interim, because before this was broadcast, I I had my first band. Well, I'd been introduced to pop because I liked the Velvet Underground. That was like 5 months before this, and my first band,
Right. And Spaceman 3.
yeah, before Spaceman 3, that came later that year. Uh, my first band with my two friends from Chesterfield who also like pop was called Siegfried's Magic Box. And the first
There
song
you
we
go.
learned and played was Waiting for the Man. But I think I actually learned it from the David Bowie BBC session, because he plays different chords to the Velvets. Maybe they couldn't work it out either.
Right.
and, and everybody like copied the David Bowie version for a while until the Velvets album came back in print or something.
Right. Well, the episode's impressive visually, like right out of the gate in the first 30 seconds. I believe they're editing all this footage of the Velvets being slowed down footage and superimposed, and there's like negative image photographs, and which, at this point, that means that they're editing this on a flatbed
Mhm.
and having to do this in their mind and then hoping that it looks cool when they get it back from the lab. There's some big swings for something that's a weekly documentary
Mhm.
program on the arts. And it seems like right out of the gate, they visually understand what they're going to be talking about, which is pretty surprising.
Yeah, but I guess the thing was, like the South Bank show, Melvin Bragg, who does the introduction,
Right.
who's the presenter, I guess he was like the commissioner of the series, or like the head on show. And he's still around. He still does radio shows. He's like 85 years old, but he's still going.
Wow.
Um, but each program was commissioned by different directors, so it wasn't like there was a team of people working
Okay.
after week. And this was directed by Kim Evans, who also did a South Bank show on Andy Warhol, which is really good. I guess the next year after he died, maybe. And the researcher was Mary Harron, who directed I Shot Andy Warhol.
Oh, wow. Okay. Incredible.
Had a bit of inside intel, I guess.
Yeah.
She was passionate in this area.
Right.
And I think that footage at the start, which occurs throughout it, the color footage of the Velvets, like with the EPI lighting and everything. That's from a film by Ronald Nemeth called Exploding Plastic Inevitable, or Warhol's EPI, I think it was originally called. And it was such a brilliant film. And this guy, once he realized that like this was going into the art world, he kept re-editing it and butchering it into like an installation. And now it's just like nothing to watch it in a museum now. It used to be a 23-minute film, and what's really unique about it is it was filmed at it's the venue called Paul Richards in Chicago, and it was the time when Lou had hepatitis, and so Angus MacLeese came back and was drumming. John Cale was singing, and the original film has two songs recorded at those concerts. I think Venus in Furs and Heroin, with Cale singing, and they don't exist on that film anymore. Yeah, and it had these 2 live songs and 3 songs, I think, from the first album, or 2 from the first album, or 1 from Chelsea Girl, or something like that.
And what was the purpose of the film originally? Just to show in a loft somewhere?
Yeah, it was an avant-garde film. It was
Okay.
distributed by the Filmmakers Co-op.
Was this your introduction to like American underground filmmaking?
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it might have been the first time. Well, it was, I mean, definitely the first time I saw a lot of that footage. And I'd probably, I'd be aware that there was this thing called avant-garde film because um, I already had, or I guess around the time I would have bought Uptight, the Victor Bockris book. Uh, just that was like my Velvet Underground Bible. Popism, the Andy Warhol book, like Popism, the Warhol 60s, and the Edie Sedgwick book I had pretty early on. So I guess I kind of knew that there was that world, and there was this Jonas Mekas character
Right.
who was like overseeing all this activity. But yeah, there was also this other important TV show called Midnight Underground, which was on Channel 4, another commercial channel. But this would have been a few years later, maybe maybe 1990. I don't know, but this were made by people that were kind of associated with the London Filmmakers Co-op, and I guess it was like cheap TV late at night, make a compilation program of short avant-garde films, and that included some films like, you know, Jonas Mekas film, or Bruce Bailey film, or Kenneth Anger film. And so that was the first time I got to see films in their entirety, strangely, on commercial television.
In this documentary, it's great because Warhol is basically, he's a filmmaker now. He's like, I'm done with painting.
Hmm.
I'm going to sponsor this new band, which I love. He says, I'm sponsoring a new band. You've worked with like Tony Conrad. Jonas Mekas has come over to talk about like the Fluxus movement, and you've shown work of like Warhol and Yoko Ono. Are you nervous to like meet these heroes for the first time when they come over? Because to me, they're mythological, right? They're larger than life.
Yeah, and they were for me because I'd, you know, for maybe 2 decades, these people were like mythic figures for me. You know, that from the moment I saw this documentary, you know, that was where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the factory in New York, in the office. But I was in Chesterfield at secondary school, you know, studying from levels. Um, and so, yeah, let me think. I guess one of the things about me is if, or I don't know if it's still the case, used to be the case for many, many years. If I got interested in something, I would like, on the one hand, hoover every possible thing I could about it, but I'd also like go to the source, you know, and try and get to speak to the people. And I suppose, you know, let me think. I mean, 1998, 99 was when I first got involved in film programming, so still in an active band at the time. Um, but I did, one of the first programs I did was like a survey of American underground film at the Barbican Center in 98. And that was just as I was starting to survey that world. I got like the New York Filmmakers Co-op catalog, which is, you know, maybe 400 pages of typed text. And I just read it like like reading a dictionary or something.
Right.
And uh, and some films I'd seen, some films I wanted to see. And so I somehow put together this program, and that involved going to New York and just knocking on the door of Anthology, Film Archives. And that was when Jonas was in the office almost every day still. And, you know, he answered the door, and like he's done throughout his whole life, you know, just welcomes in anyone off the street that, you know, might be interested in what he's doing, you know, because, you know, who knows where this might lead. And, you know, he was always really, really open and encouraging to me, not because I was in a band, because he didn't know,
Right.
but just because I was enthusiastic about this work and wanted to try and show it in England. He would lend me film prints. He would give me prints to go uptown to take to a lab for them to be duplicated so
Oh,
that I could
incredible.
take copies back to London. And things
Wow.
like really rare things like Naomi Levine films and stuff like that. Uh, so yeah, and well, when I eventually started to go to screenings of avant-garde cinema, I remember one particular screening that had like Fuses by Carolee Schneemann and maybe a report by Bruce Conner and four other films. And there was people in the audience, and one of them was me. One of them was the like programmer that had organized it. And there was just no interest or awareness of that whole body of work at that time in London in the early 90s or something. So as soon as I had the opportunity, it sort of became a bit of a mission for me to get the films seen and appreciated and move towards like getting them accepted in institutions like museums where I felt they belonged.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked at a media arts center for 5 years before I opened the video store. So we were a film education program as well as a theater, which was part of the Portland Art Museum. And the same thing, we would be like, let's have a night of Bruce Conner films. And there'd be 7 people in this 400-person theater. Everybody on the outside was like, that sounds great. But the idea of them going to it was really difficult to win people over to leave their house and actually spend time with it.
Yeah, but I was very dogged in my task, and I started it was just as we were all starting to get computers, and so I started like an email mailing list so that we could try and hang on to people that came to one screening so that we could tell them about the next screening that might be in a different venue in several months' time. And,
Right.
built up an audience. And so within a while, there was like always 150 people coming to those kind of screenings.
It's so interesting because, a film like Flaming Creatures, let's say, was originally screened not in a museum, right? It was not part of an institution or appreciated by necessarily the art world yet. But that's kind of where these are shown now. I mean, it's probably out of necessity because, like, where else are you going to be able to show it? But do you feel like does it create a different viewing experience seeing it in a museum or an institution versus like somebody's loft where it was probably initially the only place it could be seen?
This used to be something that really troubled me. I guess um, a bit like we used to be really troubled about CDs.
Right.
And then
Right.
eventually you just give in and then you're listening to Spotify all the time.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I was always really resistant to things being transferred from film onto video and then digital. Because in the beginning the technology just wasn't up to it and it looked shit. And now it does look just as good practically. And so I've kind of given into that. But still the best place to see these kinds of films is in a cinema on film. And it's fine if that's in the museum in the cinema in the museum. That's just as valid as any other cinema. But having them just, on a continuous loop on video on the wall of a gallery with loads of light leaks and all of that other stuff, that drives me crazy. People are not getting a proper encounter with the work when that happened. Yeah, that was always when I was organizing screenings. I wanted to show the work. I felt like I was the PR person for the filmmakers. Like I had to show the work in the best possible context and technical situation that it could be in.
Have you been to the Warhol Museum?
I have.
What do you think of that?
Well, I guess I loved it
Yeah, I
because
mean it's a real concentration on film.
exactly, and it was but it's a long, long time since I was there. The last time I went was probably 98. Oh, wait, let me think. No. Uh, yeah, maybe I went like maybe twice around 97, 98. And I guess it has become a lot more commercial since then. But the fact that there's a place housing all that stuff is amazing.
The funny thing in the documentary is also, has experimental moments, but it is also a dry documentary at times. Like when they introduced the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, a rock and roller from Long Island, avant-garde musician John Cale, guitarist Sterling Morrison, young untrained drummer Maureen Tucker. And it reminds me of like watching the Ruddles or something. Like they have to also storytell in a way that is going to be okay with your parents or grandparents watching the show.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And and if a few dumb voiceovers like that is what it takes to
Yes.
get somebody's parents watching Bridget Berlin in the Chelsea Girls, then I'm fine with that.
Oh, it's amazing. They cut to her in that film, and then they cut to her working at
Uh-huh.
Warhol's studio. And I was like, wow, Bridget's the last person I would have thought that would have been like a working professional, like from seeing all that early work.
Have you seen the film about her, High in the Sky?
No, I haven't.
That is amazing.
When did that come out?
2000 something, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check it
And
out.
it's directed by Vincent Fremont, who was like the factory video person. So
Okay.
it's like done knowingly and lovingly. It's really, really great.
So when you're watching this, were you aware of Gerard and, Bridget and all the characters, or was this your first introduction to this scene?
But possibly it was my first introduction to those people. And I guess like 86, 87, there was, well, I guess especially 87, the year after this was broadcast, that was like the 20th anniversary of the Summer of Love. And it just seemed like a really good period for documentaries on the counterculture, which is, I guess, why I was essentially getting interested in. And so, people like Gerard Malanga and Allen Ginsberg was in nearly every documentary. He's not in this one,
Yes.
but they just became these heads that would be in every documentary that I watched. And me
Right.
and my friends would, be able to recite every word they said to each other, like, making fun of them and doing their accents and things. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Jared looks pretty good in this one.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And it's funny, he's definitely, again, like you said, he was a talking head in a lot of these films, but he's also like, I don't really like to look backwards, but you're like, yeah, but you always are. Like you can't help it. Just own it. But I mean,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
scene's got to be full of contradictions. Do you remember your first time in New York? Were you able to soak in
totally.
any of this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the first time I went was there was there was a fallow period for Pulp, which I guess was after the like the Freaks band, the one that I got interested in. They kind of split up, and then Jarvis came to London, went to college, and there was a couple of years with no pop activity. I got a job in London. I was like a civil servant for a year, and just as a way of being able to move to London and go to screenings and concerts or whatever. But I soon, realized that I was basically earning enough money to pay the rent. I spent all my time either at work or traveling to and from work. I wasn't really reaping the benefits of being in London. So after a year, uh, I left the job, essentially moved back to my parents' house, and I went to America to stay with this girl that I was like a pen pal, I guess, with, or we would exchange like tapes in the mail. And
Right.
she was going to college at Ithaca, and I went to stay with her for 6 weeks because that was as long as I could afford. And we went down to the city, I guess, for a couple of days. And the first place I went to was the Dom. So
Wow. That's great.
and then and then I just did the tour. The Union Square factory, the Silver Factory building, which I think was still there at that time in 1890, I guess it was. I think it was still there. Anthology Film Archives. I just went and stood outside these places and looked at them.
Oh, I love that, Mark. That rules. Straight to my heart, because I would do the same things. When we played Manchester, I made our tour manager take us by the hacienda, and they're like, "It's not there," and I'm like, "I know, but I just gotta see where." And then I was like, "Okay, right, okay, you're right, it isn't here," but I had to
Yeah,
do
but
it.
the dome building's not there anymore. I mean,
Right?
it's a building quite similar to the Hacienda apartment thing. I think yeah,
Yes.
it's a shame. I did go in a few years later. Um, I spent a lot of time in New York in 1999, and because I was doing a film program at the Whitney Museum, and Cat Power did like a benefit concert inside the dome, like for the community center or something. 'Cause it was a Polish community. Right. So I did get to go inside at that point, but I don't know if the spaces were the same as they were at the time of the Exploding Plastic Inevitable.
Have you ever met anyone in the Warhol world in person?
Well, I don't know who the first one would have been. Because of my film work, I got to know Jonas very well over many, many years. Uh, and I also started work on a book. I sort of had a go at starting it in '99 when I was sort of living in New York, did a few interviews, but then didn't go back to it until 2007 to 2009. I did a lot of interviews, and this was for an oral history of avant-garde cinema. And so it was going to be like the Please Kill Me of avant-garde film was like concept. And so for that, I interviewed practically everyone that was still living from that scene, and most of them have since died. And so, of the Warhol people, Gerard, I interviewed Mary Woronov,
Oh, amazing.
Billy Name, Jonas, Amy Taubin. Um, Billy Name had an exhibition at the ICA, a photo exhibition at some point, maybe 98 or something. And so he gave a talk, and so I went to that and, just went and said hello to him. But one of the main events was an exhibition called Pop Goes Art in Augsburg in Germany. I guess I went to like some people I would like write to and exchange Velvet Underground live tapes and VHS tapes. Were kind of involved in organizing this exhibition. And it was an exhibition of like mainly ephemera, not really paintings because they wouldn't have been able to loan the paintings, but it was about the people around the factory. So um, Gerard was involved. Nat Finkelstein had a lot of photographs. He was there when I went there to the opening. He was a lot of fun to hang around with. Piero Helix was involved and was supposed to go and do a reading, but I think he died in the interim between the exhibition being organized and his reading. They had a series of film screenings, and Lamont Young and Marianne Zazila were there. And
Oh,
so I went
incredible.
over for the opening, and that's where I met them, and that started a whole other period of interest where I, would spend a lot of time with Lamont and Marianne. And so that was, I guess, that was 92. And so that was where I started to get to know a lot of these people.
Is that book available still?
Well, it never got finished.
Oh,
Yeah,
why is that?
because I had too much material.
Oh,
And most, I did 80 interviews, I think, 80 different people.
right.
And most of it was transcribed. But then I needed to, edit it all together to tell the narrative without my voice, but so all in their voice, like Peace Kill Me or Edie Sedgwick. And I started doing that and got a bit overwhelmed with it all. And then you know how it is, like if you don't have a deadline, you do other stuff. I've done several other books in the interim, but that
Okay,
much
I'm giving you a deadline.
I know.
September 2026. I want it in my hands. It
Yeah, I
sounds
don't
so
know. I
good.
mean, at the moment, all my film activity has kind of ground to a halt because the band has become active again.
Yes, of
So,
course.
I don't know. I did actually do a bit of transcribing of an interview last week, like an interview from 2009. So it's still there, you know, it won't fully emerge. I mean, I feel really bad that I didn't do it in Jonas's lifetime because he, you know, I mean, he's the person that kept all this stuff alive and not only support the people at the time they were making, but then made sure that the film survived and made sure that they were still being shown. And, you know, and he was so generous to me. And he would always ask me, you know, when is the big book coming out? And I just had to get it together.
Yeah. That sounds amazing, Mark. I'm gonna hold you to it.
Keep
I'm
sending
gonna
me
stand outside. I'm gonna go visit your house and stand outside it like you did, and visiting New York and you'll be like, he hasn't left yet, and then you can just hand it to me and I'll leave. But you know, in the film, it's interesting, and I wondered about a parallel with you working with Pulp. You know, they were doing the exploding plastic inevitable with Warhol and Mary Warnoff, you know, and the whips and the projection and the lights um and then, you know, obviously the Velvet Underground peel away from that. Can you tell me about the Day That Never Happened shows that you did with
Uh-huh.
Pulp, where you were kind of spinning color wheels and projecting Super 8? You kind of mentioned it before, but it seemed like at a certain point, Pulp really wanted like to be different visually,
Mhm.
stage wise, and then obviously that changed as well. But
Yeah, they all, I mean, I think even in the iteration of the band before the one I got interested in, they would be like hanging stuff on the stage and trying to make it look more interesting than just a band playing a concert. And then there was this period when me and my friends were hanging around and we were projecting films and we would like making interference pattern slides like we'd seen in the Velvet Underground documentary.
right,
You know, by photocopying onto clear acetate and then making slides, 35 millimeter slide mounts and stuff like that, projecting those over the band. There was the tin foil, which, you know, not too far away from Billy, named Silver Paint in the factory.
yes,
And so, yeah, I guess it wasn't like consciously like, let's do a Velvet Underground type thing. It was like, you know, put on a show and make this a bit more interesting than just people like staring at their guitars and their pedals and stuff like that. And yeah, Russell, who was our main contact with the band at the time, he would call it, because he knew we were into like psychedelia, he would call it something like candy colored tangerine flake experience or something. Yeah, and this all built up to this concert, The Day That Never Happened, which was there's like a kind of plan that is reproduced in the book of
yes.
each song is broken down into what color the lighting should be, what the special effect is, what the smell should be. Because Russell had made his own incense that obviously you couldn't smell at all in a beer infested music venue. And I think that was the point where they realized, you know, you spend all day
Yeah.
wrapping some tree branches in tin foil. And then the music's actually a bit crap, you know? You know?
Yeah.
And so I think that was the point where they thought, let's put this aside for a while and just concentrate on getting the music together.
Right. Do you have a favorite period of the Velvet Underground's music?
It's like whichever period you're listening to at that moment. Put on the third album, and it's just amazing. And how could anything be possibly better? And then you listen to Head Held High, Offloaded, and
Yeah.
that's amazing too. And then you've got Run, 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 and Sunday Morning. So I don't know. And I was part of this like postal network of exchanging all these cassettes and videotapes. And so, you know, most of the live recordings but are still known, we had on cassettes, and I would just listen to those happily all day long, no matter how many times they'd been duplicated or how bad a quality the original recording was. I would just absorb it all.
Were you listening to John Cale's and Lou Reed's solo work side by side to the Velvets when you were discovering it?
Yeah, I guess I was, because I'm the kind of person who, if I like someone, I'll get all the records, and if you really like that person, then you see the good things in the worst records they've made. You know,
Right.
I didn't really shy away from any of the records, but I guess John Cale's downfall, in a way, is the fact that his albums are so diverse, and so like people who are sort of dilettante listeners might hear one thing and then another thing and just think like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, but there were years when I was really, really into John Cale's music.
Yeah.
Like Slow Dazzle was probably my favorite album of his for a long time. Except for Music for a New Society, which he performs the line from that in this documentary. I mean, that is just it's one of those records, of the sound of someone falling apart that for me is like the absolute highest point of music. Berlin, Music for a New Society, all that kind of stuff. I love those records.
You've seen the Rock Palast concerts of him.
Yeah, yeah, and I had them on VHS for many years
Oh
before.
my gosh, incredible. I'd not seen those till I had the video store and they were putting them out properly.
That.
And it's like one year he's coming out doing this, piano and vocal performance, just beautiful. Next year he's with a band pulling the carpet out of the floor and putting it over his head and just screaming. Like no one screams like John Cale. Like it's a howl. Did you get a chance to see like Lou or John or Nico live?
Not Nico, because I guess she died a little bit too early for me. I remember being aware that she was playing a concert in Brixton in London, but it was when I was still in Chesterfield and either wasn't able or didn't think it was so urgent that I needed to go and see her.
Right.
Then, actually, Lou Reed. Have I been to a Lou Reed solo concert? I'm not sure if I did, because I guess by the time it was accessible to me, I didn't like that version of Lou Reed. Like New Sensations is an album I really love. And so there are those videos of the 1983 and 84 tours. I would have, with Robert Quine and Fred Meyer,
Incredible.
Philip Sanders, would have loved to see that band.
Me
But,
too.
by the time he's talking his way through New York and etc., I just never felt the need to go and see him. The only time I saw him actually was at St. Anne's Church, where they did Songs for Drella. And it was one of those Hal Wilner, Harry Smith concerts. Because they'd already done one in London, which I played at with Jarvis. And then they did one in New York. And I just happened to be in New York, so I went. And Lou did 3 songs at that. Van Dyke Parks played. Nick Cave, Mary Margaret O'Hara played. That was so amazing to see her. And also the McGarrigle sisters, I think, were there. Yeah, that was the only time I saw Lou, and he just like burned through, a few blues songs, and it just
Right.
wasn't interesting. But I did see the Velvet Underground in '92.
What?
I
Where
guess
where
you guys didn't have the chance to do that because they didn't play in the state.
No, in this documentary, it's so funny. They're like, they never played outside of the United States. And then when they reform, it's like, see ya.
Yeah, yeah, because I guess at that time they were becoming beloved in Europe. Yeah. Well, Lou says in the film, "I'm not interested in high school reunions."
I know. It's like,
In that
uh,
interview where it's like he can't be bothered to do an interview, but if you just meet me on the street corner, I'll give you a few lines.
oh, no one did an interview better than Lou Reed. There's that book, same publisher as yours, about the Lou Reed writings or interviews. And it's just jaw-dropping. So what was that show like?
Well, it was great at the time. So this was like 1992.
Right.
And um, they were coming to London to play. I think at first they were playing at the Kentish Town Forum, which is just down the road from where I live now, where, I've been to so many great concerts. And then they were playing at Wembley Arena, which is like Madison Square Garden.
Right.
It's 12,000 people, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Um, but the first shows were in a theatre in Edinburgh, a theatre that maybe held 3,000 people or something, so quite intimate. And I didn't have a ticket, but through my friends that I used to exchange the tapes with in Germany, they knew someone that couldn't come or something. And so very late in the day, I got offered the chance to buy tickets for the first two shows. So of course I said yes.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I didn't have any money. I could afford the train fare, but I abused my position in the Pulp fan club because we'd recently had a letter from this girl, Zoe, in Edinburgh, who had very nice handwriting and just seemed like a nice
Uh-huh.
person. I just like got in touch with her and said, "Look, I've had the chance to see the first Velvet Underground shows. Can I sleep on your floor?" And she said, "Yeah," and subsequently become like one of my closest and oldest friends.
I mean, there was something I wanted to ask you earlier, so I'm glad you brought up sleeping on floors. The Pulp People Accommodation Register, which was made to help people sleep on other people's floors. Like, that is so brilliant and also so like what at the same time. Did it actually work?
Yeah, I can't claim uh, the glory of having invented that. That was done by my friend Alex, who took over the fan club, and I got too involved in the band. Um, yeah, I mean, the Pulp fan club, it was always a very, uh, it wasn't corporate at all. It was like handwritten letters. It was very personable. And so I guess she would you know, get letters from people saying, "Oh, I wanted to go to this concert, but I couldn't, or whatever." And she thought, "Oh, well, why not just, keep a list of people who've got spare rooms or whatever, or that are open to having guests and put people in touch with each other," which, obviously now you would think is just an abhorrent and hugely dangerous idea.
But I could see at the time it being like, of course, yeah, we're all fans of the same band. Like, none of us are creeps, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you would just like, let her know what facilities you can offer.
Oh my gosh. So you sleep on the floor, you get to go see this Velvet Underground show.
Uh-huh.
And do you remember, like, did it exceed your expectations?
I mean, this was very early in the sequence of bands reforming. So
Right.
we just didn't really have any expectations, I don't think. And there was obviously no like social media leaks or anything,
Right.
until the moment the show started. 99% of the people in that room had no idea how this was going to pan out. I guess the fact that it was those four people on the stage together and still alive was, I guess, the most amazing part of the whole thing. Um, unfortunately, it was not in Lou's best period. he was he was talking and sort of sing-songing his way through the lyrics of all the songs and improvising a little bit and really bad guitar sound and like this tank of guitar pedals in front of him. Um, so that was the downside of it. The Mo pounding the drums, and Sterling just stood on the side and did his thing. And Cale was like I guess, the cooler part of the Lou John access, and he sang all tomorrow's parties. Most of the songs that Cale sang were really, really great. Uh, but obviously when you listen to that live album from that tour or watch the video,
Right.
it looked that good in retrospect. But in the moment, it was just so amazing that it was happening. And I even did go to the Wembley Arena concert,
Okay.
watching that from 2/3 of the way.
I can't imagine like the sound and the energy coming off. Could you feel the checked outness of Lou Reed from 2/3 away?
Probably could, yeah, probably could.
Yeah.
But just the fact that there was like 12,000 people, drinking like tubs of Coke, listening to the Velvet
Oh my gosh, it's so weird.
that was the least good concert I saw of the tour.
Right.
Yeah, I don't begrudge them for doing it, and of course now I'm in a band that reforms and does that.
Yeah.
To go back to the original question, that was probably about 20 minutes ago. I have been to a few John Cale solo concerts. Most of them I remember being like, when he was just playing the piano solo and singing. The last one I saw was what was that album? Is it like Homo Sapiens or something? Hobo Sapiens, is that what it's called? That wasn't a great show with a band. But I also saw Mo when she came to the UK,
Oh, amazing.
when she was doing Life in Exile after abdication, I guess. And Sterling was in her band on one of the tours. And that was when I was doing fanzines. So of course I went and interviewed them.
Oh, that's so great.
And they were really nice. Yeah, and a nice human. And Mo was also like just so she was just, I mean, it's like she says in the film, like she's ringing up the record shop saying, "I'm Mo Tucker. I just made a little single," expecting no one to know who she was. I mean, she was just so like amazed that people were interested in her and her little band that she was touring.
Right.
Uh, I, I guess I met her twice, and at one of the shows, we was in the dressing room. I can't believe that I would just go to all these bands' dressing rooms and just sit around as a teenager, and that they would let me.
That's so
But I'm
great.
sitting there with Maureen Tucker in her dressing room, and through the PA in the hall, they're playing "I'm Waiting for the Man." And she was like sitting there with our eyes closed, drumming on her lap and just so into it. Like it was the best music she'd ever heard. That was like so amazing to see after all those years.
The interviews they get in this film, I mean, it's not chock full of interviews with the members of the Velvet Underground, but I don't know, they all seem kind of at peace in a weird way about it. Like they seem like in a good mood, surprisingly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and Nico as well. Nico just looked so
Yeah.
like happy.
Yes.
Back over the past in a way she doesn't look in other interviews I've seen her.
Yeah. And I love when she says the 80s are an extension of the 60s as if the 70s didn't exist.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
Everyone has really lovely little moments. And I don't know if it probably comes with having the researcher, like you said, being so invested and kind of knowing what to ask them.
I think also because it's like early in the cycle of interest, so they've not had to go through all these interviews like hundreds of times like they would have by now. So I
Right.
guess it's all kind of fresh, and they haven't really had to look back on that period before this point.
So when you were watching this, like what were you getting from it? What was making this like the most influential and important documentary you'd seen at this point?
Well, I guess one thing is, there's a lot of clips of Velvet songs, and they all sound amazing. And like, you could just take their back catalogue and you wouldn't need any other music. There'd be enough there to keep you amused for the rest of your life.
Right.
But then it was really like the cast of characters and the introduction to this the New York counterculture of that period, the film, poetry, literature, art, music, all coexisting, and a relatively small scene that had this like massive seeping influence throughout the rest of the culture, I guess.
It's funny at the end of the documentary, it does feel like you're watching a movie in a weird way. The music comes on like end credits. Sterling, PhD in medieval English. John made and produced many albums. Gerard is a poet, photographer, and archivist. Lou, very successful solo career. Nico is in London. Marine is in Georgia playing again. And it's just like, what is this, American Graffiti or something? Like, we're just wrapping up here. It comes on really suddenly, and then it's like roll credits. But it feels like a job well done. There's something like, I really appreciate you bringing it to my attention. The interview footage is great. Like you said, you're catching them at this time where they're not beaten down with like, why are you reforming? Why don't you like each other? Why weren't you popular?
I guess what you're speaking to there is, I can't emphasize enough, like how new all this material was to people of my generation at that point. Obviously now everybody can go and look at everything all the time, but it was just that whole world just kind of opened up in front of me as I was watching this film, and there was all these different avenues of like interest that you could go and discover after it. And obviously it would mean going to the library and going to secondhand bookshops and secondhand record stores and having to work at it, but that's the joy of discovery, isn't it?
Absolutely. Did you record this? Were you able to watch this again after you saw it?
I did record it.
Okay.
Yeah. My parents would have had. Well, I don't know now. My beta and VHS, they came out at the same time. My dad went with beta at first, which was obviously a mistake. So when they got VHS, I had to dub all the things I'd recorded on beta onto VHS.
Amazing.
And then, and I would be dubbing from one deck to the other and editing out the ads. And
yeah.
So, I still have my original VHS tape that survives from this podcast. Yeah. One thing I like about your podcast is you do sound like you're enjoying it all the time.
No, I've loved talking to you, Mark, because, we were talking about it, off air that, music still destroys me, film still destroys me. And it's just what made me, you know what I mean? I couldn't be myself without just the weirdos, and it came through music and film. And I just love your trajectory with it. The book's amazing. I love that you were so frank in it. There were things I didn't know about it, like your time with Cat Power and all this stuff. It's just like, it's a really impressive book. So I want to thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're going to talk about. So on a scale from 1 to 24.
Know where you're going?
How many tinfoiled covered trees on stage at a Pulp concert do you give the SOUTHBANK show, Velvet Underground documentary from 1986?
In terms of my personal development, it would have to be a full 24.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. But at that concert, there was only 2 tinfoil colored trees.
Well, it's just so much work. I just like the idea of being like, wow, I love this so much, we got to do 24. But yeah, 24 is the right answer. It's a phenomenal documentary. And God bless Melvin Bragg for, having something like this on air, because when he talks, it's not what you expect to come out later. So,
that's right.
Thanks so much, Mark. I hope to see you with Pulp back in the States this year, and hope everything's going good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!